Hey, what's up? It's Trent, and I'm here with another podcast tip of the week. This time, I want to talk about a little editing tip. It's something I think we can lose track of when we get in the habit of just sort of doing especially when you're working on the same show all the time. You get in the habit of sort of just doing your standard tasks, and we forget about the flow of a podcast. This is one of the things I really strive to do well when I'm editing is to get the pacing and flow right. What do I mean by that? It's not a technical term. It's just what I mean by flow is it's a combination of pacing, so the natural cadence to someone's speech, as well as the way that people play off of each other. That's what I mean by flow. And flow can mean a lot of different things in different contexts. It doesn't always mean, I guess think about like a movie script, right? Or a movie dialogue, rather. So a movie script that's actually being acted out on screen. You've got these people like Aaron Sorkin that write these scripts, and the way that they're directed is it's this like super rapid fire, like, bam, 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 call and response of the cast members. Well, that's one type of flow. It adds this sort of manic, fast-paced energy to things. And that can be appropriate for some podcasts, just depends on the topic. On the other hand, you have more measured, slower, considered responses to questions that might be more befitting of other topics. If you've got a heavy technical show or a show that's dealing with weighty matters, right? Difficult subjects, then a more measured, slower pace to the conversation is probably appropriate. But all of the point is that all of those things matter, and you have to make a judgment call when you're editing as to what is the appropriate pace and flow for the podcast episode. And when you're editing, you can change these things to some extent. For instance, there are some people that just naturally speak nervously, or maybe it's not even natural. It's just something that they're nervous on a podcast. You see this with guests sometimes that aren't used to being interviewed. Sometimes they get nervous and they can introduce a lot of filler words like ums and uhs and have a lot of awkward pauses. And tightening those things up, removing all those filler words, tightening up the pauses so they're not as long, shortening them during the editing process. That can make things sound smoother, make them sound more confident, make their message come across and not make the listener sort of aware of that person's nervousness on the mic. That's great. The other thing that I think you need to pay attention to is how people play off of each other. And I want to show you a small example here. I'm just going to drop you right into the middle of this conversation, but listen to what happens as they switches from one host to the next.
I don't actually want to buy that thing. Like if I just put a little bit of space between, seeing the thing and buying the thing, I'd realize it would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Sometimes you just like really get riled up about something and then you're like,
okay, all right. So small little example here. Notice how at the end of this person talking here in the bottom, this bottom clip here, they're finishing out their sentence and the person above is talking over them. There's an interruption.
That desire to purchase would fade.
Sometimes you just like really get.
Now, that's not necessarily a problem when when you have a good discussion happening and there's a lot of back and forth and bouncing off of each other. Having someone interrupt the very end of someone else's sentence can add energy, right? It keeps things moving forward because there's all this momentum to the conversation. And our brains will fill in what that person was saying even if we can't hear the very end of their sentence. We know where they were going, and our brain will fill in that information. So this can be a useful thing. But I think sometimes we can let these things go when we're editing because it's easy, right? It's like, well, it works. That works there. But I think it sounds cleaner to actually give some space here. Let's let this person finish what they were saying, have a slight pause, and then have the next person start talking. That didn't happen in real life. This guy interrupted the other in real life, but we can change that with digital editing. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to cut the audio here and pull these two clips out. And I'm using the Reaper's ripple editing for this. Some DAWs call it shuffle editing, but basically when you move a clip, it moves everything after the time marker. It moves everything after it, right? So it moves all this stuff to the right in lockstep. Okay, so now I've pulled this out to the side. Now I'm going to pull back this little bit of conversation that I deleted. Okay, so now we have this host finishing their sentence.
I realized it would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Okay, so now they've finished their sentence, and here's the next one. Let's include the breath.
Yeah, sometimes you just like really get riled up.
Okay, now all I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull this over here so where there's a little bit of overlap so we don't have any digital zero dead space here, but now there's a little gap between the sentences.
Buying the thing, I realized it would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Yeah, sometimes you just like really get riled.
There's a little bit of a little mouth noise here. I want to get rid of that.
Fade.
Yeah.
Let's clip that out so it's not distracting.
Just would fade.
Yeah, sometimes you just.
There we go. So that's just a little move, but now we've added a pause here, and we've broken up the conversation a little bit to give the listener a break. It's sort of like a little mental breather. Like I said, sometimes it's good to have this momentum and people interrupting each other a little bit because it does add a fast-paced energy to the show. The greater context here is that there has been a lot of back and forth already, and in between two good points, we need a little bit of space. We just need to give the listener a little bit of a breather so that they can cleanly switch from one person to the next and absorb information better. So let's listen to that one more time.
Seeing the thing and buying the thing, I realized it would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Yeah, sometimes you just like.
There you go, right? So that's one simple editing move you can make is you can create space where there wasn't any space in real life. Now, if we wanted to push this a little bit further, we could. I think that's just enough space here for this particular segment of this conversation. However, if you needed more space, like someone made a profound point and we need to hammer that home, then you can do that, right? Now, these particular guests were recording remotely, so if they're not speaking, there's silence in the background. That makes it easy. If they're in person at the same table recording, so there's going to be some bleed, you might have to find a silent space and paste it in here. But we could add more space if we wanted to, right?
It would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Yeah, sometimes you just.
Okay, that's a much more dramatic pause, right? That is enough of a pause to really let something profound or a complicated point sink in. And it makes the other host sound like they're considering that point before they respond. It's a very different feel to the conversation than what we started with. Here's what we started with. There was an interruption. Okay, here's where we started.
Buying the thing, I realized it would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Sometimes you just like really get riled up about something.
Okay, there's that. And let's go back to our dramatic pause.
Buying the thing, I realized it would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Yeah, sometimes you just like really get.
See, that doesn't work. The long dramatic pause doesn't work in this context because it lost all the energy, right? You lost all the momentum of the conversation. Okay, so that's clearly overdoing it. But now let's come back to just a little breath and a pause.
Thing, I realized it would just fade. That desire to purchase would fade.
Yeah, sometimes you just like.
That feels about right to me, right? A little bit of pause, not too much. This is a small example in the middle of a longer conversation that you haven't heard, so you kind of have to take my word for it that this is the appropriate move to make. My point here is that this is one of the most powerful tools we have as editors, is the ability to change pacing and flow. And we can create space where there wasn't space in the actual conversation, and we can also delete space. And by doing that, we can greatly affect the way that the podcast comes across and the way that listeners can absorb information.